Oh hey, yo, what's poppin'? Real quick before we start this video, I want to let you guys know that today and only today for 24 hours starting now at the point of this video being uploaded, every single one of my custom Spider-Man poster illustrations for every live action Spider-Man movie is 20% off on my Etsy shop. This is the only day that this sale and discount is going to be active at the moment because in honor of Spider-Man Day, I want to give you guys a quick discount for all of those Spider-Man posters. You can order individual posters for whatever movie you want, you can order sets based on what Spider-Man you want, or you can order the entire collection together. The discount applies on every single one of them, whether it's a single poster or the whole collection, doesn't matter. Every single poster is hand-signed by yours truly, dedicated to whoever orders the poster. More information about that at the end of this video, or click the first link in the description to take it to the Etsy shop. Anyway, let's get the video started. So, it's time to make the list that I've never made before, and a list that I've always struggled to make. But I suppose that the kid who wears a Spider-Man mask all the time should kind of live up to the name and actually talk about Spider-Man. More so than I already do. That's like what most of my channel is based around. And given that today is Spider-Man Day, there's no better day to make this list. Look, I love every single one of these movies to death. I've watched all of them a million times over and still get chills every single time. If you can't already tell, Spider-Man is such an unbelievably important character to me and my entire life. If my page and content didn't already give that away, it's not even the Marvel franchise as a whole, but it's Spider-Man alone that means that much to me. It's always been my passion, and following that story no matter what iteration it's in. And we've been given a lot of those stories over the years. So here it is, my personal ranking of every Spider-Man movie we have seen so far. That was awkward. Everything spanning from the first Spider-Man all the way to the most recent iteration of Across the Spider-Verse. Now, before we get into it, just a few things. Number one, I'm only including Spider-Man specific movies, so no side roles like Civil War or Endgame or Infinity War, as cool as those are. I'm only including these Spider-Man main movies. Number two, it's just a Spider-Man list. So sorry Sony Venom, as much as I love you, we're not including the Venom movies on this list. And lastly, number three, most important, this is my list, it's not yours. In no way is it meant to invalidate or injustify your list. You have yours, I have mine. I respect yours, you respect mine, and I would absolutely love to hear your list and reasoning down below in the comments. I find it really interesting how everybody's lists can diversify and be different from one another, and everyone has their favorites. This in no way is the correct list or the definitive perfect list of Spider-Man movies. It's just my ranking of it, and of course I would love to hear yours down below. I'll be ranking these movies overall, so not just about one thing, like the story, the plot, the characters, the fighting, the set pieces, but overall as a whole, looking at the median of what that movie is. So it's not just about what has the best fight scenes, what has the best swinging, what has the best romance, action, characters, acting. It's about all-encompassing. It's about taking every element that applies inside each movie, bundling it all up into one package, and ranking that as a whole. I feel like that makes it a lot more fair to compare the movies overall, because there are certain elements where some movies skyrocket above others, but ranking them as an overall piece, which they should be viewed as, is the best way to compare them overall. I don't hate any of these movies. In fact, I don't think I dislike any of them at all. Not even a little bit. I wholeheartedly love every single one of these movies that's on this list. As I said, the character Spider-Man means a lot to me, and so does the movies he's portrayed in. I've seen all the movies a million times over, and they all speak different things to me and mean different things to me. They've all been just a huge part of my life, and I will absolutely gladly sit down and watch any of them at any given point any day of the week. This video is simply just where they would go on a list on a spectrum of all 10 of them. It's certainly not meant to diss or discredit any of the movies. It's simply just a list of 10, and every spot needs to have a movie in it. To make the list more approachable, I'm going to be as fair as possible. For each of the movies, I'm going to give a quick rundown of it, go over the stuff that I like, that I think that they did well, as well as touch on the things that I think they could have improved, because of course nothing is perfect. That's including these movies. There's something to be improved about all of them. But without further ado, let's get into it. Nah, cut that shit. This video is already going to be long enough. Let's just get right into it. Starting off at number 10, we have Spider-Man 3. Now, I know that starting off this list, I'm already going to have some heads turning at me, and I have some people clicking off already. And to those people, yeah, I can't blame you. I'm sorry. Listen, again, I don't hate this movie, but it did have to go somewhere on the list. And this was not an easy spot to pick any of the movies to go in. Trust me. When I was starting off this list, the number 10 spot was the hardest to actually pick, because it was basically admitting that this is the movie I like the least out of all of them. And anytime I put a movie in this spot, I kept trying to defend it or kept trying to find a way to bump it back up, and it was an endless cycle. It was heartbreaking to pick this spot, but it is a list and it has to go somewhere. So it's with a very heavy heart that I say Spider-Man 3 is starting off our list at number 10. Now, that doesn't mean that this movie is bad, like I said before. I do think that it was in a very rough spot having to follow Spider-Man 2, as we know that was just peak, and it's known to be not only one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, but one of the just greatest movies of all time. Following that movie was already rough and already setting this movie up for incredible expectations. But also, this movie had a lot of hurdles to jump over in the production of making it, and it gave the movie kind of a disadvantage starting off. Through no fault of its own, the movie does struggle through a lot of things that are very apparent. Obviously, there's an oversaturation of villains and intertwining story threads that don't really mesh together. A lot of things that just seem thrown in and hashed in at no thought. The romance definitely struggles a little bit more this time around, and a lot of the plot elements just seem shoehorned in for the sake of adding more substance or characters. But again, none of that is really the fault of Raimi. Raimi never planned for Venom to be in the movie. He didn't even know who Venom was. He was forced in by the marketing team to actually include Venom into this story, and that's where it all kind of went south. Giving credit where it's due, he did manage to turn it around to something actually watchable, even though it wasn't his initial vision. So definitely props on him for that. But overall, a lot of this movie was just working against itself. There were too many stories to juggle all at once, and it could be said it wasn't a very satisfying sequel to the sequel. But again, that doesn't make it bad. It might only have one leg to stand on, but I still do very much enjoy Spider-Man 3. I think the action is fun, the characters are great. This time around, we see a lot more confidence from all of the actors, and their chemistry is really well together. And even though the story threads are a little bit mismatched, they're easy to follow and understand overall. And of course, the final battle is fantastic, seeing Harry and Peter team back up, and the overall theme of forgiveness and fighting your sins with the symbiote and Sandman, all of that merging together following Peter's story, is very strong. I will never complain about watching Spider-Man 3, and I will always enjoy the time I spend watching it. But when it's faced up against the other movies, I have to pull the trigger and put this one at the number 10 spot. I'm sorry, we still love you, Bully Maguire, but you gotta go somewhere. Coming in at number 9, we have Spider-Man Far From Home, the second entry into Tom Holland's MCU Spider-Man story, and it's just that. It's the second entry, and not really anything else. Setting aside my bias from this film, because I really do enjoy it, there's nothing super groundbreaking that really happens here, aside from the last credit scene that's only purpose was to set up No Way Home. And I want to explain, by saying that nothing groundbreaking happens, what I mean is nothing in the overall story groundbreaking happens. There's a lot in this story, like certain elements of Peter's growth and his journey, that seem to be touched on and done better later or earlier in his trilogy, or some of the points are even backtracked later. The example I give is the strongest point of Peter learning to trust himself and be his own hero, not living up to Tony but being himself. That point is very strong and serves as a really good leg to stand on with this movie. However, it's done better in Homecoming and No Way Home, so it's kind of retreading the same exact ground with just very baby steps moving forward. It's not that there are bad story treads of Peter learning to rely on himself versus others, it's just the fact that they are retreaded over in this movie, and it doesn't seem that this movie was given the same love on that aspect. As well as overall in this story, Peter is a very passive protagonist. He doesn't seem to push the story as well as other movies. A lot of things just happen and he happens to be there, versus him actively pushing the plot forward. Again, Far From Home is not bad. There are just some things that aren't done as well as other movies. However, Far From Home does have a lot of very good things. One of the things that are done really well is the chemistry and dynamic between Peter and Beck. We really are sold on the fact that Peter wants to be mentored by this guy, that he's actually a trusting ally until the switch. The end battle is simply perfect, and watching Peter struggle and go through those triumphs over and over and being his own hero through that hallway scene is crazy good. And I always get chills watching this final battle, seeing how he jumps in with so much confidence, and slowly throughout the battle he's more battle damaged, he's more worn and torn, he's more running out of ideas, but he still tries. The MJ plotline is pretty strong overall as well, and of course the illusion scene is by far peak cinema. We all know about that. Anything that is done well in this movie is done really well. However, anything that it might struggle on is simply just things that other elements of this media do better, such as Peter's growth, his independence, him learning to be his own hero, all of that stuff. Like I said, this doesn't make Far From Home a bad movie, but if other movies do the same aspects better, by process of elimination, it's going to move the movie down a couple tiers. But it is a very enjoyable, fun movie. It has that good, like, coming of age movie where you get a little bit of nostalgia watching it. And it's always pumped watching Peter fly into that final battle with his new suit. Which, by the way, the red and black suit, unbiased in the movie, but If I was ranking these movies based on suit designs, that would be way higher. But we're gonna give it number 9. Coming in at number 8, and this one's going to shock a lot of people, we have Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, I'm going to be dead honest. This was hard. I almost didn't want to believe myself when putting this one where it was. This was probably the hardest movie to rank out of all of them, and it's definitely not a challenge to understand why. This movie literally has everything, every villain, every hero, every Spider-Man, every lesson, everything coming together in a culmination of a love letter to Spider-Man, and that is exactly what it is, a perfect love letter to any Spider-Man fan and Spider-Man as a character overall. Every single character here, not just the Spider-Man, but the heroes, the villains, the side characters, they all learn a lesson. One of the things that I praise this movie on is every single Peter, 1, 2, and 3, has the ability to both learn and teach a lesson based on the other Peters. And that's something that can only be accomplished with the previous context of the other Spider-Man movies, and that is a testament to how great this movie was written to have those Peters in it. And of course, it has the greatest Peter Parker arc we have ever seen on the big screen. With, of course, spoiler, him making the ultimate sacrifice to wipe his existence from the universe. Which is just mind-boggling to think that every single sacrifice we've ever seen is incomparable to that. This movie has action, it has drama, it has humor, it has sadness, it has tragedy, it has great acting, great action set pieces, everything. It has the nostalgia, it has the win factor, it has all of that. So why is it not higher on the list? Well, that's actually the reason, is that it has everything, and that's possibly too much. Let me explain here. It kind of has too much going on for you to actually focus in on what you're supposed to the point where some of it may feel forced and poorly written upon re-examination. Like I said before, every hero and villain learns a lesson. We get a movie that has all of the important Spider-Man villains, all 3 Spider-Man, and all of them learning a lesson. Tom learning self-sacrifice and selflessness, Andrew learning redemption and to forgive himself for his past mistakes, and Tobey learning to mentor and prevent others from making his past mistakes. All of that is done remarkably well, giving us a very satisfying ending to all of the Spider-Man and wrapping up their stories. And that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. Mwah, chef's kiss, don't touch that. But when you start to look at this movie as a whole, it begins to get a little bit more jumbled. And after the initial hype dies down, it's very easy to point out the ways that the movie and story falls apart and doesn't really make that much sense. There's a lot of things that happen in the movie simply for the sake of nostalgia or trying to get a selling point into the movie. One of those main points is, of course, the other 2 Spider-Man. When you're watching this movie and we get to the second act and we're introduced back to Tobey and Andrew, part of you begins to forget that this is actually Tom's movie. Of course, he's still given the most screen time, but some of the importance is almost shifted onto the other characters as we're interested to see as to where their stories ended up. We get to see those stories, where they ended up and where those characters are, but it shifts off of the main focus to Tom. That shift, of course, goes back in at the end, but there's a little bit of a gap where we kind of lose the interest of our main character. And then once they're introduced, we now have 3 Spider-Man to keep track of, 3 stories that we want to keep up on, 3 people that we want to watch learn their lessons. And then on top of that, we have all of the old villains coming back. And this is where the story kind of starts to feel a little jumbled. Goblin is kind of framed to be the main villain, except he's not actually in the final battle until it's convenient for him to be. Then he's all of a sudden the most important villain to all 3 of them. Sandman has no quarrel with any of the Peters, so why is he mad? Lizard is barely even in there. It seems like he was just added in so the battle could be bigger. It seems like they wanted to just make this a really big level event and slam as many villains as they could as possible against all of the Spider-Man to make it a more fair fight. Now, I don't really know how to feel on this. I'm kind of torn because on one hand, it feels very oversaturated and very much forced. Having to force all of these things to happen all at once just so we can get a cool battle. But on the other hand, dude, it's so cool seeing all 3 Spider-Man against all of the main villains. That's awesome. Seeing the 3 Peters swing together is cathartic to say the least, and seeing Tobey and Andrew return was fantastic. I honestly don't think I know exactly how to feel about this oversaturation, and it feels that unless you're a diehard Spider-Man geek, you won't understand half of it. And that's kind of where I think I have an unfair viewpoint. I've never been able to watch this movie from an unbiased perspective. I went in with the nostalgia and with the context of being a huge Spider-Man fan, so it was specifically catered for a person like me. The movie does a fantastic job, however, of not pulling any punches. They treat May's death like it's really something real. There's no jokes, there's no one-liner, and there's a severe afterthought to the fact that she's gone. Her death is real, and there are real consequences, and it's treated as such. And the response from Peter is absolutely gut-wrenching. Very rarely do we see a point in live action where Spider-Man literally says, I don't care, I'm done. And whenever we do, it's a really deep-rooted sadness we feel that the hero who's never supposed to give up does. And a movie that can accomplish that, does it really well, is gonna get some value points. Both of the other Peters have great roles, of course teaching lessons and learning their own to wrap up their own stories. And of course the final confrontation with Goblin leading up to the sacrifice is a beautiful scene overall. Tragic, but beautiful. This movie does a really good job of putting every Spider-Man where he needs to be in the moment of him to learn a lesson, and also putting them in another moment to teach a lesson. And of course, overall, the best part of this movie is the final swing, seeing Tom finally take up the mantle of an independent Spider-Man, being his own person, being his own hero, making his own suit, and going out to stop crime with no help. No friends, no MJ, no Ned, no Tony, no Happy, no SHIELD, no Avengers, just Spider-Man. And he still gets up to go out to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, setting us up for a beautiful trilogy that we will now see unfold whenever that happens. Overall, this movie has a lot riding on the fact that you have the previous context of old Spider-Man movies and a lot of nostalgia, and when you take those things away, the movie definitely starts to break down a little bit more. But needless to say, I enjoyed the movie. It's overall a good time, and I'm not going to say no to fan service if it's done well. So it's going to come in at this spot. Coming in at number 7, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, this one has definitely flip-flopped around my list a lot. Initially, I did have this up in the top 5 because I genuinely did think that it deserved to be in that top 5. And I still think it has elements that could justify it being up there. However, upon re-examination of the other movies and where they all slotted, this one kind of just slotted its way down to number 7. This movie is truly the definition of a coming-of-age movie, and it's shown no better way through the superhero setting. This movie does one thing really, really well that none of the other movies have ever come close to doing, and it's getting the fact of Peter Parker in high school right. That's it. Peter Parker is a high school student. He's just a kid, and this movie definitely capitalizes on that element. So much of this movie takes place in school, on a school trip, around teachers, around classmates, in detention, in the gym class. A lot of this movie, pretty much 90% of this movie, is centered around school, the peers, all of that stuff. That environment is where this movie is centered. And that is such a crucial aspect of Spider-Man's early character. Too many times in a Spider-Man project do we see Peter in school for a little bit and then he's immediately off fighting the big bad villains. He's immediately off in the big city doing the big things, right? And yeah, I guess you could say for the MCU, he goes from high school to fighting Thanos. But for this movie, just in isolation as its own thing, we really hone in on that homecoming in school thing. And I think that's what gives this movie such a homey, nostalgic feeling, is giving everybody something they can kind of latch onto. We kind of relate to Peter in the halls of high school, in detention in high school, on a school trip in high school, with his class students, with all of these peers. We can kind of relate to that and put ourselves in this position and kind of see what he's doing. There's even small little elements about this movie that are done to give it that little bit more of like nostalgic, homey feeling. Like going out to dinner after you failed to cook it and you burnt it. Or the warmer color grading in school versus the cooler color grading of the villain's lair. All of it goes to build this aspect of Peter Parker in high school. And the reason I care so much about that is because it's such an important part of Peter Parker's story, is to hone in on the fact that he's just a high school student. We've all been there. We've all had a million classes, a million homework assignments, trying to balance it all. And the fact that Peter still goes out and chooses to be Spider-Man throughout that shows his enthusiasm, shows his excitement to be a hero. And the fact that now we can look at it as an overall trilogy and see where it ends up and see how his story grows, it definitely goes to build a lot of his character within the MCU. And one of the things about that is it really goes in on the fact that Peter is just a high school kid in this world full of super soldiers, aliens, gods, Avengers, all of these things that we've seen in the MCU. Peter is just a simple, small high school kid trying to make a difference in his own world. And I think that's done best in this movie. This movie just has such a great charm to it, from all of the little creative details of Spider-Man's fighting style, to the final battle where he dons his homemade suit, which is peak, and of course foreshadowing the decision in No Way Home. The decision to do the right thing regardless of himself. Now, the things that this movie kind of lacks in are some of the scenes seem a little bit too forced, and they were solely just kind of there to either set up another scene or show Peter as an incompetent hero. Which makes sense if you look at it, but it kind of takes you out of it overall. The movie itself does suffer from the MCU fatigue flaw of having to watch a lot of other Marvel movies to kind of understand the full context, but it's individual enough where you can watch it on its own viewing and not be totally confused. But that leads to the biggest flaw that people point out in this movie is Iron Man. Now, I will admit, I've always been in the defense that Iron Man is a great mentor figure and is taking the Uncle Ben role in those movies, and I don't dislike that. I think it works really, really well having Peter be mentored by Tony, and I love the relationship they have. But part of Peter's story has always been that he is alone, that he has to figure this stuff out for himself because no one's gonna save him. And having Tony there to kind of mentor and reinforce Peter slightly takes that aspect away. Now, the reason I say slightly is because we now have the overall context of the full trilogy. If we were just talking about Homecoming when it just came out and we have no other movies, then yes, this would be a major flaw of the movie, of taking away the individuality of what makes Spider-Man so great. But the fact that we have Far From Home showing Peter be more of his own hero, go more into his own confidence, trust himself, and then of course leading into No Way Home when he makes the final sacrifice, it now lets this movie serve as the part of a climax. It shows us his starting point, that he was mentored, that he does have help, but now he doesn't. And he literally had to lose everything as a hero to become Spider-Man. That's where I think this movie is saved a little bit, is having the overall context of the MCU. Overall, this movie is just a great comfort movie. It's really fun to watch. There's great action. It's really great. It's really creative, and it's just overall a good time. And with the context of the final Spider-Man trilogy now, it serves its better role. So Spider-Man Homecoming is gonna come in at number 7. Coming in at number 6, we have Amazing Spider-Man 2. Look, I'm not gonna keep pretending. I understand that this movie is flawed. I understand this movie was not written great. I understand there's a lot wrong with this movie and a lot that needed to be fixed. But holy crap, I love this movie so much, and I'm not gonna keep pretending I don't. Actually, now that I think about it, I've never pretended I don't like this movie. I've always been very vocal about how much I love TASM 2. So I'm putting TASM 2 very high on this list, number 6. I think this movie has really low lows and really high highs, and those really high highs take it to the spot that it's in. They heavily outweigh the weaknesses of this movie, and that's a testament to how strong they are. If you solely focus on the story that is focused around Gwen and Peter's struggle to be Spider-Man, that is top tier gold. That is the greatest Spider-Man movie if I've ever seen it. It has perfect chemistry, perfect intertwining of story threads, all of that. The only places that it fails at is everything else in the movie. But even though those things are flawed, I still find positives in them. The action scenes are great. The fights are super energetic and creative. The Electro scenes are pretty phenomenal, and it was interesting seeing where they took that character to make him individual, to kind of make him unique. The swinging, of course, is by far the best we've ever seen, and the suit is one of the best. Those are things that don't need to be said, but I'm still going to. The romance and the chemistry in the Peter and Gwen story is top tier. But again, even with all of those strengths, I'm not gonna ignore the clear flaws. I gotta be fair. There is definitely a lack of a cohesive story. The Gwen's death seemed very, very rushed and sloppy. It seemed that we knew we had to get to that point, but we didn't know how to get there. So there's too many things that had to happen to force Gwen in a situation where she's not gonna make it out. It didn't seem like it was naturally built up to. Same thing with the rushed implementation of Harry's Goblin. I think that could have been done really well if they had thought about it, but it just seemed that he was an afterthought, just thrown in at the last second, just to give Peter another challenge. A lot of the story just simply works against itself and doesn't give it a strong leg to stand on, and it's very hard to see past that. But when you can see past that and enjoy the movie for what it is and enjoy those positive aspects, it is a great movie. The good parts are honestly the best parts of the film, and it does what every other movie does, but better. Any scene with Andrew and Emma is phenomenal. The acting and chemistry, the connection is by far the best we've ever seen. As well as just having an absolute banger of a song for Peter and Gwen. Like, tell me that you don't have this in at least one playlist. And then when you tell me you don't, tell me that you're lying, because I know that you are. Everybody has Gone, Gone, Gone on at least one playlist. Overall, where this movie lacks in technical proficiency and an overall writing cohesiveness, it makes up for in the characters, the arcs that they go on, the weight that they carry, and just the overall fun and enjoyment of this film. Again, this is a comfort movie for me, but at this point, all the Spider-Man movies are. So, Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes in at number 6. Now, we have officially made it into the top 5, and we are like an hour into talking about this already. So if you have actually made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you continue to watch through the rest of the video. If you did make it this far, please consider liking and subscribing and sharing this video. Would definitely appreciate it to get it out to more people, because it's definitely going to be a longer vid. But moving into the top 5, our number 5 pick is going to be Spider-Man 1. Now this one I might get a little bit of heat for, but I think it's fair. Yes, I know it's the first one, but I'm not basing this list off of nostalgia. If I were, it would probably be a very different list. I made sure that before I made this list to rewatch over every single Spider-Man movie again with new, fresh eyes. Try trying my best not to feel the nostalgia I used to and looking at it objectively as just the movie I was watching. Because I knew that the main thing the Raimi movies had in store for them was the nostalgia we feel for them. That early 2000s nostalgia that everyone feels. And I definitely wanted to avoid that affecting my rank in any way. So after doing that to all of the movies and analyzing them, I can comfortably put Spider-Man 1 at number 5. But given that there are only 10 movies here, being dead middle of the list is actually pretty good. Like, it's basically in the top 10 of the list. This is basically a top 10 list, to be honest. Number 10 was still pretty great. However, with all of that being said, damn, I forgot how good of a movie this is. Like, my God, we were spoiled with Sam Raimi. Spider-Man 1 was my, probably like a lot of you, first introduction to the Spider-Man character as a kid. I had all the Raimi action figures and I played the trilogy VHS tapes on loop. And Spider-Man 1, of course, kicked that off, being the first real groundbreaking superhero movie in a while, and starting a trend that would eventually snowball into the X-Men movies, the Fantastic Four movies, and then the infamously known MCU. Even though it wouldn't officially be attached to the MCU until No Way Home nearly 20 years after its release, it still set the groundwork for it. This was our first live-action big movie adaptation of Peter Parker and the web swinger himself. And for that, it automatically gets a lot of credit. Credit that I will not ignore. Being the first, having no groundwork laid for you, having nothing to reference, literally just saying, hey, I'm gonna make a movie about this Spider-Man character, the most popular superhero ever, that's gonna get some credit. However, I'm also not going to blindly praise that. While this movie was the first to do a lot of things, it doesn't necessarily mean it was the best. Like I said, it didn't have a reference point, but it did serve as a reference point for everything after it. A lot of those things definitely do show through. The acting and dialogue is a little corny compared to other things. Some of the scenes seem like they can drag on a little bit longer than they should. A lot of the humor is dry. Maybe it's just old 2000s humor, but it doesn't stick as well as it used to. It either sticks or it doesn't. Get it? Sticks. Sorry. And the quality of some of the things overall is a little bit touchy. The fight choreography and overall fighting movements is a little harsh. But I'm really just nitpicking at this point to find things I don't like. The movie is iconic and there's nothing that can take that away. And again, similar to Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Far From Home, the things that it does well, it does really well. The things that it struggles with, the other movies just kind of do better. It shows us an insight into Peter's character, who he is as a person, the origin of his story. And while it seems a little rushed in this movie, it still is done very well. It does feel that we are oftentimes rushing through his origin to get to the Spider-Man stuff. How we kind of rush through the being Peter Parker aspect to get to the big Spider-Man set pieces. Yes, I know we want to see Spider-Man swinging in action, but when we're halfway through the movie and we're already seeing Spider-Man fight off a big villain, it kind of makes the origin movie feel like a short film and another film attached onto the end of it. Nonetheless, overall, we still get to see who Peter Parker is as a person throughout this origin movie. We really get to know who Peter is and why he does what he does, why he is who he is, and what makes Peter such a good person to be Spider-Man. And it gives the whole movie kind of a more warm, comforting feeling to watch. Knowing that the person who's under that mask is just a kind-hearted kid who wants to help others no matter what, even when the world hurts him, gives us that nice, warm-hearted feeling. That, of course, is later expanded and done remarkably well in Spider-Man 2. This movie simply just has a soft spot for a lot of people. It's really hard to give it any form of criticism since it's so shielded by nostalgia. And again, it is in no way a bad movie. This is a 9 out of 10 movie. It just has flaws like any other movie would that become apparent with time. It absolutely does not take away from the amazing viewing experience of this movie and the lessons that still hold true nearly 20 years later. And it will always hold a special place in our hearts and a special place on this list because it's number 5. Coming in at number 4, I will admit this one was my number 3 until about 5 seconds ago, but I instantly switched this one and number 3, and I think you'll understand why when I get into my number 3 spot. So bringing in to number 4, this is definitely going to be a controversial pick putting it this high, but over the years, the love for this film has outgrown the previously initial hate for it. At number 4, I have The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Do you remember how I mentioned earlier when talking about Spider-Man 1 that it was a great introduction to Peter, but not the best origin to the Spider-Man character overall? How we kind of rushed through that story to get to the Spider-Man action. We see the shift from Peter to Spider-Man, but then he's already a superhero, right? We don't see the groundwork. This movie is the exact opposite and absolutely thrives in it. All 3 of the Spider-Man have had some form of an origin story, whether it was dedicated to an entire movie, a quick scene, half a movie, or an entire trilogy. All of them have some form of an origin that get Peter to become Spider-Man. However, none of them do it quite as well and match the technical quality and charm of the Amazing Spider-Man. Not to mention the realistic effect and grounded approach of this movie. I will defend this statement till the day I die. This is the best version of a Spider-Man origin story told about Peter Parker's character out of every iteration we have seen. It brings such a sense of realism and connection to the actual character and the story that the others don't even kind of come close to matching. When I spoke about Spider-Man 1, the main point I brought up was that it rushed through the origin to get to the superhero action. We get to spend like an hour with Peter and then he's a superhero, but we don't really get to see him learning to control his powers other than a quick scene. He kind of already has magical control over them. And I don't know if you've ever tried to learn a new skill, but that's not really how it works. I understand for plot convenience it makes sense, and it just seems like there's too much of an overlap for it to be believable. However, in this movie, Amazing Spider-Man 1, it is the exact opposite. We spend the entire movie with Peter before he even becomes Spider-Man. Once he gets his powers, he's not immediately Spider-Man. He's not immediately a hero. He becomes a vigilante, serving himself out of simply selfish nature to get back at Uncle Ben's killer. That is his only goal, and I think people don't quite understand that. Up until the bridge scene where he decides to save Jack versus the Lizard, the only goal that Peter has when being Spider-Man is A, to avenge his uncle's killer, and B, get a photo of the Lizard for money. He has no interest in saving people. He has no interest in being a hero. He's using his powers for selfishness. That was a scene that Tobey's Spider-Man did really well too, serving him as a vigilante to hunt down his uncle's killer, and of course, landing the final blow. But this movie spends almost the entire runtime doing that, highlighting that Peter is a flawed person, and giving somebody who is this selfish person these powers means he will do selfish things. He doesn't truly become Spider-Man until the moment on the bridge where he makes the choice to save a life versus going after the Lizard. Look at this scene a little bit deeper. If he had gone after Connors, he would have definitely cleared his name with the NYPD and probably gotten some form of a reward for turning him in, or getting the picture like it was initially promised. But instead of going after the Lizard and finding more out about him, he decides to stay back and help somebody. That is where Peter Parker officially becomes Spider-Man, near the third act of the movie, where he makes a selfless decision. We really get to see the depth of Peter's character here, how dark it gets when he loses Ben. We get to see how he doesn't just immediately become a hero when he gets these powers. He uses them as an outlet for his anger. He hunts down Ben's killer. He goes after smaller criminals that he can pick on because it feels good, using his powers for selfishness. And it really hammers down the fact that he is this cocky, arrogant teen who has been bullied his whole life and finally has some form of power that he can use against people. He abuses that power. He becomes the same bully that he was being bullied by. And you might be asking, Miles, why do you care so much about that? That's not even Spider-Man's character. Spider-Man's supposed to be selfless. That's why I care. It's because it shows the shift when Peter makes the active choice to be selfless. When he makes the choice to save Jack on the bridge, and after that point his uncle's words finally ring true in his head that he can do great things, he has an obligation to do them. And in doing so, in lending that hand and helping that person and saving that life, he officially becomes Spider-Man. He wasn't Spider-Man before. He was just a vigilante seeking out justice as a way to outlet his rage. But now he is Spider-Man, and from that point on, he uses his powers to protect others versus just hunting down criminals for his own desire. He uses it to help people who were defenseless just like he was. And I honestly think that's a point that people miss a lot of times when looking at this movie. People say that he's like too cool or too cocky for riding a skateboard in the beginning and dressing all grungy and aesthetic. But you know that a skateboard and aesthetic clothes don't automatically make you cool, right? He's still a loser to everyone. He's still an outcast to everyone. He's still isolated from everyone. Yeah, sure, he's not your typical nerd, but this movie was definitely going for more of a realistic, isolated loner version than just the stereotypical nerd. He's seen more as a social outcast. That's the point, is he's supposed to come off as some arrogant, cocky douchebag that's been outcasted for his whole life. So it makes sense that when he gets these powers, he's gonna do something selfish with them. He's gonna do something for himself. And in essence, that goes to showcase the arc of what he learns from Ben to finally, after his whole life being kicked down, treated like garbage, he finally decides, now that I have this power to do something for myself, I'm gonna do it for other people. Because that's what heroes do. That's why this movie's so great, because we spend so long on that origin, getting to see who Peter is, how dark of a person he is, and how his life is. but the slow growth of becoming that masked hero. That's what gives this movie so much charm. I think people severely underrate and discredit this movie for everything it does so well, and I implore you to give it another watch. The fight scenes are really fantastic and super creative. Andrew's Spider-Man is the best at showing how a spider creature would actually physically fight in battle. Not just punching or kicking like any hero would, but he sticks to walls. He wraps around enemies that are larger than him. He crawls, he scurries through. He uses his flexibility and speed versus strength and power. All of that, but amped up and translated to a human who would have those powers. The web swinging is, again, clearly the best in the franchise. The Amazing Spider-Man movies do that better than any other movie. Every single actor brought their A game. Andrew and Emma are, of course, on top. And, of course, the fact that it's such a strong origin give it so many points. However, that doesn't make it a perfect movie. The lacking points that I would definitely want to point out are the villain and the story. While I love the lizard, I don't think that he was used very properly in this movie. The design is still a little off-putting to this day, but people have beaten that into the curb a million times over. I'm not going to waste time on it. This movie definitely prides itself on a more realistic and grounded approach to Spider-Man, and it delivers in every single aspect except the villain and his plot. It seems very, very realistic and grounded until we get to the third act, and the lizard just wants to turn everybody into a lizard. That's where it gets really comic-y and really weird. That's really outlandish and makes too little sense to be in a movie that was trying to be so realistic. I think it would have benefited this movie to swap out the lizard with a villain who's a little bit more grounded in the darker crime syndicate of New York. Give us a villain like Chameleon or Kingpin or Tombstone. Give us someone more realistic to follow this kind of darker, grungy approach you're going for. But we ended up getting the lizard, and it's a little bit goofy and fictitious. However, I'm still going to try to be optimistic, even though it's very goofy and his plot makes no sense, his goals are outlandish. It was done as well as it could have been done, but they definitely should have done a different approach for the villain and that story thread. However, the story threads with Peter, Gwen, and Captain Stacy are done beautifully. Overall, this is truly the underrated black sheep of the Spider-Man movies, and I think people forget about it too much. I think more people definitely need to go back and re-watch it to give it more love and attention, to actually see why it takes the very deserving number 4 spot. I really wish I could put this higher on my list, but given the other movies, there's really nothing else I could do about the rest of this list. That is clear cut in stone. Speaking of which, moving on to number 3, the spot that I initially had on number 4 but swapped it at the last second. We have Across the Spider-Verse. This one has definitely been a tough one for me to rank because I've seen it the least out of all of them. But if you know me and you know how big of a Spider-Verse fan I am, when I went through my rewatch, this one definitely swapped into number 3, and for a very good reason. This movie does everything that the first movie does and more. It succeeds in every single element of pushing the story even farther. So much so to a point where we're now in multiple universes. We're in a multiverse now. And while I am not the biggest fan of the multiverse and the different plot lines and stuff, and the different time threads, it's still a cool story thread nonetheless. I could talk for hours about things I love about this movie. The writing, the story, the characters, the art, the animation style, the musical scores, everything is fantastic. A tier all around. However, again, like every other movie, it is not perfect. And I don't think it's as perfect as everybody initially made it out to be. Even though this is my number 3 spot for a very strong reason, I do want to take a second to talk about this particular thread. It highlights a particular aspect of the story that I don't really like and I've never really liked. It's the canon events. Now, I won't go too far into detail here as I have another video kind of planned about this that I might go farther in later. But in short, my biggest gripe with this movie was the idea of canon events. The idea that certain things have to happen for Spider-Man to be born. Uncle Ben needs to die in the plotline. Captain Stacy needs to die in the plotline. These people need to die to create Spider-Man. And while that might make sense because of course every Spider-Man has that happen, the more we dig into that, the more it kind of destroys the character of Spider-Man, I guess? Let me explain. We begin to look back at every single one of these canon events from Spider-Man 1 all the way to No Way Home. And we see that these events are no longer fate. It was no longer Peter's selfish actions that killed Uncle Ben. It was the canon event. It was a planned, coordinated event that we knew had to happen for Spider-Man to be created. What made the initial event so great before it was called the canon event was the fact that it was Peter's selfish actions that got those people killed. It was Peter selfishly going to the wrestling ring that got Uncle Ben killed. It was Peter selfishly storming out that got Uncle Ben killed. It was Miles going in over his head fighting these villains with these spider people that got Uncle Aaron killed. All of these things were just fate, things that accidentally happened that turned these characters into a hero. This movie takes all of that and kind of changes it, making it a planned out event that needs to happen to create the character. Quite literally to the point where there is a time in the movie where they literally say this person has to die. Miguel literally lets people die because it has to create canon events. There's literally a scene where Miles saves somebody that everybody knew was not supposed to get saved, which now means Spider-Man isn't supposed to save everybody. They're supposed to save specific people. And I hate that. That is not what Spider-Man is about. However, that's why this movie is number 3 for me. And you might be wondering, that makes no sense. Hold up, let me cook here. That leads directly into what I love so much about this movie, and upon rewatch, why it takes number 3. It's Miles Morales. Miles is done so perfectly well in this movie that it is borderline the best Spider-Man we've ever seen. Everything that I just said I hated about that canon event thing is the same viewpoint that Miles has. He sees how stupid it is. He sees the hypocrisy. He understands Spider-Man should save everyone. Spider-Man does not play judge, jury, and executioner. He doesn't pick who dies and pick who he gets to save. Spider-Man always does both. He always saves everyone. And he stands up to it. He refuses to let the people die because they have to let a canon event play out. He is wholeheartedly sold on the fact that Spider-Man should do everything in his power to save everyone. That is the true nature of what Spider-Man is. And it's the fact that Miles doesn't just stand up to Miguel or Gwen or Peter B. It's the fact that there are hundreds of these Spider-Men, Spider-Women, Spider-People, Spider-Everything in this society that all tell him the same thing. No, sit down. He doesn't care. He stands up against all of them and says, I don't care how many of you there are, you are wrong. This is wrong and you should know it's wrong. I think there's literally a point in the movie where he says, don't you see how messed up that is? And when I rewatched this movie and Miles said that line, I'm like, yeah, this is why the movie is so great, is because Miles is the viewer. He's us. He is the person who says this is wrong. Miles is the one sensible person in this entire movie who actually speaks to what Spider-Man stands for. Obviously, aside from Hobie, who just pieced as soon as shit hit the fan. We love him. Miles obviously knows that this is all wrong, and he stands up even if he has to do it alone. And the whole time for the movie, I felt that I was rooting for Miles and only Miles. I didn't feel anything for the other Spider-Man characters who were kind of trying to reason with him. I was only on the side of Miles because I fully agreed with him. This is wrong. You shouldn't do this. And I fully believe that if I were in a situation like that, where everyone was telling me something wrong and I knew it was wrong, I wouldn't be afraid to go against the grain and do the right thing. That's what Spider-Man means, is to do the right thing and inspire others to do the same. And then of course he inspires other people, the team at the end, to actually go in and change it, to be like, hey, maybe he's right, and following his lead. I think that's why this movie means so much to me, is because my initial dislike of the canon events made me realize how well Miles' character was written at the fact that there's literally a character in the movie that says this is wrong. He says what the viewer is thinking. Other than Miles' character being absolutely perfect, the other praises in this movie obviously go to the visuals, the score, the direction. The animation style is absolutely superb, and they just keep stepping up the game from last time. The action, the comedy, the humor, the drama, all of that stuff is done remarkably well. And of course, the twist end where Miles actually ends up in the wrong universe, making the spider that bit him the wrong one. All of that stuff was done really, really well and built up to very strongly. And of course, the more you watch it, the more you begin to see that that's how a twist should be done. There's subverting expectations, and it's slowly built up to the whole time. From the universe number on the teleporter being wrong, to the spider being wrong, to when he's teleported, the color grading being different. All of it was done super well. It was done and hinted at so well to the point where a keen-eyed viewer could notice Miles was in the wrong universe before he could. I like the fact that Gwen's character was given a lot more screen time and love, really fleshing her out and giving her more depth, so we finally understand a little bit more about her and who she is. Obviously, because she's going to be a major role in the next movie, having a lot of that groundwork and context to build her up is great. And of course, Hobie Brown. Gotta love him. This is an absolutely phenomenal movie. However, it is only a part 1 of a 2-part movie. It is incomplete, so it's kind of difficult to rank this against the other movies as a whole, as it's meant to be a 2-part and of course overall 3-part trilogy that's told in one story. Depending on how Beyond the Spider-Verse goes, this might alter my list a little bit, but obviously that movie isn't out yet. So at the moment, this is our number 3 spot. Coming in at number 2, at our runner-up spot, and what most people would say is the best Spider-Man movie of all time, and what I would agree with if it weren't for my number one pick. Number two has to, of course, go to Spider-Man 2. God, what can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? What can I praise about this movie that hasn't already been praised? What can I talk about that hasn't already been touched on in thousands of video essays around the world? The best set piece in superhero movie history, the best Spider-Man villain, the best Peter Parker story, all of it's been done. All of it's been talked about, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Spider-Man 2 is perfect. It is the perfect encapsulation of Peter Parker. It hones in on the Peter Parker story better than anything else ever before. Who is Peter Parker and what does he stand for? What does he value? The more that I watched the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, the more I realized how much they actually focused on Peter Parker's character and who he really is, and how they absolutely nailed it. I can tell that Sam Raimi had one goal with this trilogy, and it was to tell us the story of who is Peter Parker. So much so where the first line in the first movie is, "Who am I?" That is answered in no better movie than Spider-Man 2. We really get to finally connect with who is under that mask, because we spend most of the time with him. We connect to Peter. These movies are Peter Parker's movies, and Spider-Man is a side character in Peter Parker's story. They do not play equal roles, and that is done to an extreme in Spider-Man 2. We get to see the two sides, the side of a hero that no one ever talks about or no one ever really thinks about, the flaws, the drawbacks, the no time for anything, the exhaustion, the detriments to trying to live a normal life, the things that most heroes don't ever have to face. We live in a world now with the Marvel Cinematic Universe where we kind of have this disassociation to a hero and their normal life. These heroes who have a stacked team on their back to face the threat, or government funding to finance their projects, or a billionaire playboy, or endless amounts of resources to do what they need to do in these movies. And it's on such a grand scale, but when you look back to Spider-Man 2, it's such a small scale with such a big weight. That's what gives it the weight. It's just some dorky college kid struggling to make ends meet. He's got no money, he cannot hold a job to save his life, he's in a crappy apartment with a failing relationship, he's late to everything, he's failing his classes, he can't do anything right, but after all of that, he's still a superhero. He still puts on the suit and mask every single day, no matter what, and he goes out to save people. But he doesn't even win. That's what this movie is about. It is at its core a Peter Parker movie. And what's so great about it is we get to see how awful that world is for both Peter and Spider-Man. I know that feels really wrong saying that the best part about this movie is how awful his life is, but let me cook. The newspaper absolutely hates him for everything that he does and tries to defame him every chance they get. The people begin to believe this and start turning on Spider-Man every chance that they get, even after he saved countless of them countless amounts of times. Putting his life on the line every single day to save people he doesn't even know, those people then turn on him. And then you flip it to Peter Parker's life. He's failing at his relationship with Mary Jane because he can't be on time to anywhere. He can't dedicate time to her because he's Spider-Man. He's late to class. He loses his job. He barely holds down his apartment as it is. And even though he does, it's a shitty apartment that the door doesn't work. Literally every single aspect of this dude's life is kicking the crap out of him. That's the point, is that nothing in his life is going well. You're not meant to smile at this. You're meant to literally say, damn, that sucks. And the golden thing here, the reason that everything is falling apart, the one thing that if he didn't do this, he would actually live a great life. Everything is falling apart because Peter is Spider-Man. He's disassociated from his life because he's Spider-Man, because he's living two lives. He loses his job because he's Spider-Man and can't get there on time. He's late to class because he's Spider-Man. He's failing at his relationship because he's Spider-Man. His life as Peter Parker is suffering because he's Spider-Man. Spider-Man is a direct antagonist to Peter Parker's life. And that's not even what makes it the worst. What makes it even worse than that is this movie makes it a goal to show you that there is no benefit to being Spider-Man. Nothing. If Peter Parker's life sucked, but Spider-Man's life was pretty okay, this movie wouldn't have the impact that it needed. This movie shows you that Peter Parker's life sucks because he's Spider-Man, but once he puts the mask on, his life still sucks. There's no benefit to being Spider-Man. It's not a trade-off or a fair trade. The newspaper still hates him, the criminals still go after him, and the city still turns on him. There is no winning for this guy. Every aspect of his life, both personal and Spider-Man, is built to break him down. But he keeps being Spider-Man. He keeps trying. That is until he doesn't. anymore. This movie takes a route that we would never expect Peter Parker to ever consider, and one that No Way Home touched on pretty well. This was the movie that did it first, and this was the movie that did it better than any other iteration. Spider-Man gives up. He literally stops. He throws away the mask and suit, and he stops. He doesn't want to kill himself for Spider-Man anymore because there's no benefit on either of his lives. So he gives up being Spider-Man and he starts living his life as Peter Parker, the way that he should have been living. And this all goes to make the story arc so great because this is what happens that no one else ever expects. Obviously, we would expect when he gives up being Spider-Man that his life goes even farther downhill. We would expect it to get worse, but it doesn't. What happens next is something that no one could have predicted. Peter Parker's life goes really well. His life turns out better. He's on time, he's passing, he's happy, he's charming, he's confident. Peter Parker is finally happy, and we get to see exactly what his life would be like if Spider-Man wasn't a thing. All of this because he gave up being Spider-Man. We get to see finally that Spider-Man saves everybody except for Peter. Peter is the only one that suffers from the actions of both Spider-Man and himself. So he finally said enough is enough, and he made the choice to stop that, to live for himself. And we as the audience almost want to root for him. The way that these scenes are framed and the way that we're kind of predicated into this story, we almost want to cheer for him that he's finally happy, but we know deep down it's wrong. We know deep down that Spider-Man doesn't do this. So even though we're seeing a happy Peter Parker, we know that that's not right. That's not what Spider-Man is. That's not who Spider-Man is. That's not who Peter is. And that's what it is. That's the thing. That's why nobody else could wear that mask except Peter Parker, because that's what makes Peter Parker Spider-Man. Any other person would have seen that their life is significantly better without Spider-Man and taken that mask off. But Peter Parker, even after living a life where he's happy, understands it's not right. And he puts the suit back on to save people, knowing full well he will continue to suffer. He will continue to lose things. He will continue to give to a city that only ever takes from him and that he owes nothing to. He still decides to put the mask back on. Nobody is forcing him to do that. Let me make that clear. Let me make that abundantly clear that nobody is telling him to be Spider-Man. Aunt May gives him a pep talk, sure, but she's not telling him put the mask back on and be Spider-Man. The newspaper asks where Spider-Man went, but nobody's asking for him back. Nobody's telling him you need to be Spider-Man. He makes the decision because he knows it's the right thing to do, because he knows that he has the power to change things, which makes him have the responsibility to do that. Because that's what Peter Parker does better than anyone else, is he sacrifices his own life away to save a city that he owes nothing to, encapsulating everything about what it means to be a hero, to be Spider-Man. The hero that knows no greed, who gives but never takes, and does all of this while nobody ever even knows who he is, who's responsible, who deserves the praise that he'll never get. The hero, the name, and the man that is Spider-Man. Oh man, I just got chills. I love this movie so much. That's it. That lesson alone is what makes Spider-Man 2 one of, if not arguably, the best Spider-Man story ever told. Just that lesson alone shoots this way into the top, and it was never even a consideration how high this should be on the list. Every single iteration of Spider-Man hones in on that message, hones in on the message of being Spider-Man, even though that your life will suffer because of it, doing the great things because you have the responsibility to do it. But none of them go as deep, as far, as tragic as Spider-Man 2, showing us just how much Peter's life sucks, but he still chooses to do it. How much of a burden comes with putting on that mask and going back in and day out, losing your job, losing your girl, losing your classes, to save a city that still hates you because you know it's the right thing to do, because no one else will do it. That alone puts the movie in a top 3. And I think that that's universal for every Spider-Man fan. I cannot imagine a world where any Spider-Man fan would rank the movies and put Spider-Man 2 less than number 3. Aside from that, there's of course other things we have to praise about this movie. The acting and confidence of the actors is incredibly better compared to the first one by a landslide. The relationship scenes are much more believable and the dialogue is a lot less corny. It's more realistic and we can actually buy what people think. We also have a phenomenal villain as one of the best. Actually starts off as a friend to Peter, so it's even more well written and even more of a kick in the dick when Peter loses him too. And of course, what we spent like 2 minutes talking about, Peter and the overall burden of being Spider-Man. Overall, this movie does a lot well. Just about everything well, to be honest. It's really hard to find critiques about this movie unless you really hammer down and search. If I absolutely had to find something about this movie that could improve, it would be the slightest of things. Like, some of the dialogue is a little corny. Some of it's improved from the last movie, but we're still in that 2000s era where it's a little bit cheesy. And of course, Mary Jane is just an absolute problem in this movie. I don't like her whatsoever. She literally woke up and decided she wanted to be an issue for the whole movie. And it seems like the rivalry between Harry and Peter is super forced and only there to set tension for the new Goblin in the third movie. But this is literally just me grabbing at straws at this point, trying to find things to fairly criticize about the movie. I can't criticize this masterpiece against what I just talked about how good it is. The only other critique for the movie would be that it's defended by nostalgia. Spider-Man 2 might be said to be overrated, but I don't think it has that reputation without reason. I think it is, to date, one of the best interpretations of Spider-Man, and definitely the best interpretation of Peter Parker we've ever seen. And it definitely deserves the spot on this list at number 2. And it would absolutely be number 1 on this list if it weren't for my number 1 pick. And obviously, anybody who knows me knows what my number 1 pick is going to be. This was no question when I was making this list. And if you've ever seen me or my content, you know what number 1 is going to be. Yeah, this one's number 1, and it's by a long shot. Like, no disrespect, but it wasn't even close. This was number 1 before I made the list. Every movie on this list does something well, whether it has a certain element of storytelling, a lesson to be learned, a scene, or anything in particular. For Homecoming, it was the high school setting. For TASM 2, it was the chemistry. For Spider-Man 3, it was the darker side of Peter. For Spider-Man 2, it shows the struggle and balance. But when it comes to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, this is a movie that takes every single one of those things and does it well. Not just well. It does it brilliantly. When I think of the definition of peak, not just peak Spider-Man or peak superhero movies or even a peak movie, but just peak overall, I think of this movie. In every regard possible, I think of Into the Spider-Verse. Everything, and I sincerely mean the word everything about this movie, is done with the utmost perfection and creative ambition I've ever seen. And with such an artistic elegance and style and flair to it that makes it its own thing. Do you remember when I said earlier at the beginning of this video when I was breaking it down, I said I would try to be objective. I said I would approach every movie without bias, and I would try to talk about things that were good and were bad. Yeah, this was the one movie that I lied about, and I knew damn well I was gonna lie about it. Because this movie, not just on an objective level, but on a personal level, beats out every other Spider-Man movie to date and every other movie. This is my top movie of all time. From both my unbiased and biased standpoint, this is my favorite movie. Into the Spider-Verse follows Miles Morales, a new face to the Spider-Man that we've seen from the comics, who's been getting a lot more love and attention over recent years. And given that he is my favorite Spider-Man, you could conclude that I'm pretty happy about that. And not just about that he's giving more love and attention, but the fact that every single iteration of him, whether it's movies, games, comics, anything recent, has been done so well. We haven't really had a weak interpretation of the character. We follow Miles on his origin story to becoming Spider-Man. Now, I'm sure we've all seen the movie, so I'm not going to give a play-by-play to the entire movie. You can go and watch it, have a good time, then come back to this video because, you know, it's a good. So let's talk about what this movie does and does so well. Like I said before, this movie does a lot of things well. And of course, like every other movie, it has a strong lesson to be learned from our main hero. While the other movies take Spider-Man and teach him a lesson to become a better Spider-Man, this movie takes a bit of a backpedal. And instead, the lesson isn't on how to be a better Spider-Man, but it's simply how to be Spider-Man, how to be yourself, how to be your own hero. Asking the question in the beginning, do I have what it takes to even wear this mask? And bookending that by saying, yes, anyone can wear the mask. Everybody has the strength and power inside of them to make the right choices and be Spider-Man. Be a Spider-Man role model to others. Giving Miles the powers without him wanting them, without him asking for them. Just being a kid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and happened to get them accidentally. And for the majority of the movie, he absolutely sucks at using them. He fails miserably. Like, really bad. So much so where his incompetent actions get his uncle killed and his friends hurt. And it goes to show an aspect of Spider-Man that we don't really get to see often, that being Spider-Man isn't a cheat code. It's not an instant win. It's not some magic power that once you have it, you can do whatever you want. It takes a lot of discipline and skill and learning the powers, the patience to understand what you're doing, and of course the responsibility that comes with all of it to make the right choices. It's not just a free one-way ticket into a superhero life. Since Miles, for the majority of the movie, does have the powers, but is not a hero yet. Not even really super yet. He's just kind of struggling, but with powers. He's just there. And it takes him pretty much the entire movie to overcome those fears and anxieties and leap into the unknown. And obviously the entire leap of faith scene should be just a movie in itself. That alone automatically puts this at number one for me, as the leap of faith scene, which I strongly believe is the greatest cinematic scene of all time. And I'm honestly not even overstepping on that. Early on in my channel, when I used to make video essays, I had a whole hour-and-a-half video on just that one scene that never got published. It was like 13,000 words. I just talked about that scene. Imagine this video you're watching, but only about one scene. That's how much I talked about that scene. Looking at this movie, when we look at Miles as a character, there's one main thing that's holding him back from being who he wants to be. It's the fact that he doesn't know who he wants to be or who he's supposed to be. And everybody's expectations of that keep sabotaging that. The entire movie follows the idea of great expectations. And those can be an absolute detriment to people in a growing stage of their lives. Especially in this stage where Miles is now dealing with his new powers that he has no clue how to control. Add that on top of everything else that he's struggling with, and of course he's going to be overwhelmed. Everybody in this movie has an expectation set out for Miles that forces him to be anything except himself. And when he finally gets to the leap of faith scene, it's him figuratively and literally breaking free of those fears, those anxieties, those expectations that others people have been putting on him. The entire leap of faith scene is, like I said before, a story within itself. It's Miles breaking free and finally being himself, and it's just only more richened by the rest of the movie. That scene, myself and many others have said personally changed their lives. That scene on top of the entire movie did that. Harking back to the idea of great expectations and what people think us to be rather than us making that decision ourselves. The leap of faith is a leap that everybody takes in life. A leap into the unknown without any prior knowledge, but jumping right into that fear that we can't see but we've been avoiding. Miles shares the story that we've all been through before, or a struggle that we're currently going through, and he makes it out. The leap of faith is a literal representation of breaking free of the expectations and the fears of your life, simply to become your own person, to be who you need to be, who you want to be. And again, that's just one scene of the movie. The entire movie has lessons everywhere that change our lives. Trying again after failed relationships and failed friendships, learning to be yourself, expressing to love a family, and working together. The whole movie teaches these things. Now, I know that every Spider-Man movie teaches lessons like this, but like I said, this one does it in such a new and fresh way and a different level of proficiency that it adds such an impact into the meaning of each lesson. Looking past those lessons and how deep they go, let's look at the other things that this movie does really, really well. The story, for one, again, following Miles on his origin to become Spider-Man and how he reacts to that is amazing. Spider-Man is already an underdog character, and Miles trying to live up to that underdog character is him literally taking the mantle of an underdog to the underdog. He's trying to live up to the impossible shoes that Peter left to fill so suddenly. We obviously have the voice cast that absolutely brought their A game, all perfectly casted. We have the fight choreography, the swinging choreography, the shot composition, the artistic style, and the fact that the entire movie is animated is just a testament to artistic creativity and ambition. And it still beats out every other live action movie because animation is an art form and deserves to be in the same level as live action. I honestly do think that the animation of this movie was one of the reasons it was so good. The artistic choice to do it all through Photoshop and animation sold me on the comic book feeling of it. And it really showed that the people behind this movie cared so much about bringing it to life. And it brings a new rejuvenated pop to the characters and the world overall. While the animation might drive some people away, for me and many others, it was simply just an enhancement to the story being told. Definitely in a new way, and I wouldn't want to have the movie in any other way. And I implore you that if you were afraid of watching a movie like this because it's animation, please try to get over that fear and just watch the movie as a normal movie. I don't know why there's such a bias against animated movies. The dialogue and writing is top tier, and the soundtrack is absolutely stacked and beats out every other movie on the list. Every single time I watch it, there are more things I notice to look for and spot that I never really noticed before. Everything that just shows the time and passion and all the elegant care put into crafting this movie. And the list just keeps going, it keeps stacking. I know I said before that Across the Spider-Verse takes everything this movie did and enhances it, but it wouldn't be as good as it is if it didn't have this movie to stand on. This movie laid the groundwork for that movie and set the bar so incredibly high that the only way that they could go is up. Anything good about Across the Spider-Verse is made as good because of this movie's such strong foundation and everything that this movie did. When I started off this video, I said I would list off some things each movie could improve upon, but I'm gonna be completely honest here, and maybe it's just my number one spot blinding me, or maybe it's just I don't want to put in critiques, but I really cannot think of anything in this movie I would have improved or done differently. I went and rewatched this movie just before I filmed this video with a very critical eye, looking for things that I would have done differently, but I couldn't find anything about this movie I would want to change that would inhibit the rest of the story being told. It's such an airtight story that any change I would make would require a change to the whole movie, and I wouldn't want to change that. In terms of genuine criticism, I don't really think I have any. I'm sure that there are some out there, but myself personally, I don't have any. That's not to say they don't exist. I'm sure somebody could sit there and find criticisms and nitpicks about this movie and they would 100% be valid. I'm simply just saying I don't have any. At least not any that would deter from my immense enjoyment of this movie. This is an absolute 10 out of 10 Spider-Man movie and movie overall on this list, and I absolutely stand true to that. Again, it's just my list, and like I said, this is the only movie I will be biased on because of how much it means to me, and I'm going to be transparent about that. But even if I was unbiased, this would still be number one. This movie and the lessons that it taught probably came out at a perfect time in my life and helped me so much personally throughout a lot of stress and anxieties I was personally facing during that time. And I'm sure it did the same for many others. I've heard from countless people that it changed their lives. It truly encapsulates everything about what Spider-Man means and putting on that mask, taking on the mantle, and filling those great expectations for yourself. Truly showing us that no matter who you are, we all have the power to wear the mask and make a difference in the world. So for my number one pick, I'm absolutely putting Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. So that was a very long video. If you made it to the end of this video, I sincerely do want to thank you for watching through and listening to all of my picks. And for everybody who did make it through to the end of this video, I do have a surprise for all of you, and I want to give a gift back to you. If you've noticed behind me these three posters right there and the little thumbnails that I've dropped for every single Spider-Man movie, except for the animated ones because I haven't finished them, those are all custom illustrated posters that I personally have done myself that are posted on my art Instagram. I've done them for every live action Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man 1, 2, 3, TASM 1 and 2, and all the MCU Spider-Man movies. Because today is Spider-Man Day, for a limited time only, I will be offering a discount, 20% off of all of those prints on my Etsy shop. The link is down below. Every single one of these prints, whether you get them individually, you get them as a movie set, or you get them as the overall complete set for 24 hours after I post this video, will have a 20% discount for the duration of Spider-Man Day. So if you love Spider-Man and you love those posters and you want to get one for yourself, now is the best time to go and get one. You can get them on Etsy for 20% off. Link is down below. Thank you so much. As always, I would love to hear your list down below and the reasoning you have for every single movie. If you don't want to leave a whole list, then tell me what your number one movie is, what your number one Spider-Man movie is. I would love to hear it because I definitely want to gauge my audience, see what movies we like the most, and just talk about Spider-Man with everybody. This was an incredibly long video, but I do thank you sincerely for watching the whole thing. Make sure to grab those prints. Feel free to like and subscribe if you're new. And of course, happy Spider-Man Day to everyone. Peace and love. Do good things, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Spider-Man!